Mentalizing is a concept which is very important for everybody. And to me, like we came across it in a therapy. Oh, this was like a really dry cut, right? Like that's always what I do. Like just don't bother. But like conversation was done, new topic starts. So this came up at a time where I still really struggled with sort of like my reaction to things and my emotions, like on understanding my emotions, understanding my emotional reactions, and yeah. And with this, my therapist was just like, "Hey, there's this concept called mentalizing, and I think if you would watch this video, this would maybe like profit us in our sessions." So nowadays, I'm actually like, this wasn't too long ago, actually, which is underlining the fact that I might be autistic even more because once I understood the concept, I'm just using it. Um, but mentalizing is basically important for like everybody in any type of conversation or relationship with a person to um like, especially if you often feel like you're like in a hostile environment, or if you feel like unhappy in these like conversations or discussions, or just in general in relationships with other people. So I think we're just gonna go into the video, and uh, if you have any questions, just text them, and then we can pause, go along with them. But I think this is a really good concept.
Hi, I'm Janice Poplack, Director of Clinical Social Work at the Menninger Clinic. I'm here today with Dr. John Allen to talk about mentalizing. Dr. Allen is a senior psychologist at the Menninger Clinic and professor of psychiatry at the Baylor College of Medicine. Dr. Allen has lectured and written extensively on the subject of mentalizing. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Appreciate it. And I have a lot of questions about mentalizing.
Okay.
Mentalizing actually seems like a new word. What does it mean?
Well, actually, it's 2 centuries old, the word, but it's a rare word, so lots of people haven't heard of it. No wonder you're asking about it. Basically, mentalizing refers to being aware of what's going on inside yourself and other people, being aware of your thoughts and feelings and the thoughts and feelings that other people have. And it's a little confusing because it sounds like a technical, esoteric thing, mentalizing. But basically, it's something that we all do naturally, except we don't always do it so well. And of course, with psychiatric disorders, they really get in the way of mentalizing. That's why we pay so much attention to it.
Well, it sounds like it might be quite a bit like mindfulness.
Well, it is a lot like mindfulness. The way I think of it is that really you have to start with mindfulness if you're going to mentalize. And mindfulness means you're being attentive to something. So you could be attentive to paying attention to a flower or paying attention to your breath. But when you think of mindfulness, being mindfulness of what's going on in your mind or someone else's mind, then you're in the territory of mentalizing. But it's more than just paying attention to what's going on inside yourself or inside someone else. So for example, if suddenly we're sitting here filming and I bolt out of this chair and run out of the room, what would go on in your mind?
Well, I think first I'd be concerned
Thank
about
you.
what's going on with you, and then I would probably try to figure out what it is, something that's happened.
Right, so that gets to the mentalizing piece. First, you're aware of what's going on, and then you're trying to understand it, come up with some kind of explanation or some story about it. So what way you think, the story, what would you create? What would be the story?
Maybe you had gotten ill suddenly or something like that.
Yeah, or panicky or something like that. So that's the mentalizing piece. Let me give you another example. So what if you're sitting there interviewing me, your heart starts racing? What would go on in your mind?
Well, I would wonder why all of a sudden am I nervous? It
Uh-huh.
might be these cameras here.
Yeah, okay. So you'd be mindful in the sense of paying attention to your heart, maybe starting to think, what are you feeling? And then what the reasons for your feeling. So that puts mindfulness and mentalizing together.
Well, how is that different than empathy?
Well, again, it's quite similar. If you think about empathy, refers to being aware of what somebody's feeling and concerned about it, compassionate about it. Or even more broadly, empathy means you kind of put yourself in their shoes, so you have a sense of
Right.
what's going on in their mind. So what I like to say, if patients are confused about what mentalizing means, I think about empathy, but also include empathy for yourself. And why I like the idea of mindfulness is that it implies that while you're trying to pay attention, be aware, and understand, you have this kind of non-judgmental attitude, curious about what's going on inside yourself and others.
But why would this be important?
Well, a couple of reasons. First, mainly, in order to have relationships go well, we need to mentalize. We need to have some sense of what's going on in the other person and ourselves. And we're really interested in relationships that can provide a sense of security and comfort in the face of distress, since we're working with people who are in major distress. So we think about secure attachment relationships, where you're really connected to the other person. Because in order to have that feeling of connection and security, really you have to have a sense that this other person is attentive to you and has some understanding of what you're distressed about. The other thing about mentalizing is it does include this empathy for yourself, self-awareness. So in order to be aware, self-aware, we need to mentalize. And if we come back to relationships, you need to be self-aware and be able to mentalize in order to communicate with the other person what is going on with you, what you need, what you're troubled about, so that they can mentalize and understand.
So what gets in the way of mentalizing?
Well, most obviously strong feelings. So for example, if you're afraid, you're not going to be so curious and interested about what's going on in the other person. You're going to really think about protecting yourself. So you kind of get concerned with your own welfare and
Are you still like everybody gets it so far? I feel like maybe talking about it for a second is good to make sure that we also like take everything away from this video. But I think so far it's like it's presenting like a very easy concept, right? Like a concept which seems, yeah, like you also said, like natural to everybody. Right? And we definitely like do this the entire time. I think I do. Up to this point, like the concept of empathy. Yeah. I think the concept of empathy is honestly like a little bit I feel like mentalizing, like empathy is more like to me at least, empathy is more of like a feeling. Um where mentalizing is to me also including that the story you write for the other person is like that you're aware of the story coming from you kind of, and then it's like one possible outcome, but might just be like a different one as well. Like to me, mentalizing is also taking this concept of this is somebody who could think that, but also can think something else, like that it's like your perspective. Um, also into it. Where empathy is more of like a thing you just like feel or you sort of don't feel. Um, but mentalizing is like the thing you then like actively do with the empathy. Yeah. Like the usage of empathy. Yeah. And what I had to think about actually when they now brought up like what gets in the way of mentalizing, right? Like strong emotions, fear, anger, shame. And this um gives a very new or like not really new perspective, but a more detailed and I guess professional perspective on the issues we face in our society right now, right? Um, because whether you are like right wing or left wing, like whatever your political stance is at the moment, I think a thing we can all agree on is that the situation right now on the world is like very tense. Like it's very scary for like multiple different people and for multiple different reasons. And it's like there's so much going on. You always hear like bad news. You always like there's always more stress and things happen and they get interpreted in any way possible. And there's also more, yeah, I guess just more anger of like things going wrong and things not changing, and the it gets like more and more extreme at the moment. I feel like the last few years has been sort of like this process of everything getting even worse, sort of. Like this is like feminism before was like a topic where we had protests, we had like informal and educational events and stuff like this, but now it feels like feminism all of a sudden feels like more different because now with, for example, America and stuff like this, we feel more like on edge. Like now it's not just fighting for like a better future, but it's fighting for the rights we once had and now are actually being taken away. So everything, and I think this is probably also the same way people maybe from the right feel that like it gets just like this fight we're in or the progress we're trying to make um, feels like it's more necessary than before. Like it feels more desperate, sort of, and like you're being sort of pushed into a corner. Like there's definitely more fear and anger. Um, and there's also a lot of shame if you don't understand any of these perspectives, then you're like an outcast. Like these different sections of people, like it's getting from this more grayish perspective, it's getting more to like a black and white perspective at the moment. So there's a lot of shame. Like if you're not black and you're on the white side, then you don't get this perspective and there's a lot of shame and the other way around the same. So it's like very black and white for like all types of different topic, like democracy versus, or like not democracy, but well, technically but the Democratic versus the Republican, for example, or like the feminists versus the, yeah, I don't even know how they call themselves, but not feminists, I guess. Um, so there's like a lot of shame as well. And I feel like what this video now is actually underlining is that this whole concept of mentalizing, even though it's so important for normal human relationships and also for like self-awareness, is actually way harder in these times today because of so much fear, anger, and shame. And because we have so many negative news, which really put us in this place to feel a lot of fear, anger, and shame. And that really puts us all into the place of having or like struggling with mentalizing more than before. And I guess we sort of see that also, like there's this uh uh, yeah, how do you call that? There's a lot of controversy about the death of this right-wing advocate. I think he's called Charlie Kirk. And I don't know too much about the incident. I just know that he was basically being gunned down while some event of his, and he had a family and all. But he was like very right wing, like very racist and whatever. Say the left and the right, of course, are standing behind him, like he's putting himself on the line for us. And there's been a lot of controversy around the reaction to his death, basically. So there's been some left activists who I actually don't know his name. But there's this guy who makes like basically like who has this stream and everything where he talks about where he tries to, I guess, confront and educate right wing people. And he in his stream he cried about the death of Charlie Kirk. And this got actually like a huge backlash because people then didn't trust him sort of anymore and were like, well, but like you never cried for the Palestine and whatever. Like you're apparently like you're not actually left. You're just um like why you so they basically shamed him for this reaction for like a higher reaction to like a right wing person dying who caused like so much distress in their community specifically and not having the same reaction to for example Palestinians dying. um and I don't really want to get into like what is right and what is wrong about this, um but more of that there's this very big difference in how the community feels about this. And there's a lot of people actually sort of celebrating this death of this person, which is, well, not really showing empathy. And this is sort of the point where I want to get to that because of these strong emotions like fear, anger, and also shame, there's probably a lot of left people who feel like maybe they need to do that because otherwise they will be shamed. But there's a lot of people who, because of their fear and anger, are put in such a mental state that they don't really have empathy for the other anymore because it's more of this like survival mechanism of like, I need to survive on my own, so I don't have so you just like naturally you don't feel as much empathy. Like it makes a lot of sense like bodily, right? Because like if you're in like a fight for life and death, you shouldn't really care about if like the other person you need to kill in to survive has family. Your body actually just wants you to think of yourself. And so we see this on like any on like the whole board, like not only on the right, not only on the left, not only uh in like for example like queer influencers when like somebody I don't know, for example like if Elon Musk would die or something, and not only in people like Elon Musk and stuff like that. And it's a really interesting concept that something as big as mentalizing, which is apparently that important for society, because I mean, they say it's basically like necessary to have like a secure attachment style in any type of relationship. And our relationship with society is also sort of like a relationship. It's like it's harder to define, right? Because it's not with one person, but there's definitely like there's definitely these attributes like in a relationship that you make the broad mass into a thing you feel a relationship with. So there's people who, for example, like very pessimistic towards the broad society and think very pessimistic about society. And every person they don't know essentially and turns into this blob of broad society. And all of them define this get treated like this ambiguous person of broad society. And then there's people who are very hopeful towards society or very positive towards society and who have a way, like a really way positive, more positive picture towards strangers then. And I feel like it's really really interesting to see how something like fear, like broad um, fear, can influence like an entire society in this way, and how we get influenced very, yeah, basically like nearly biologically by fear and anger and shame, um, to the point where our logic basically changes, right? Personally, I don't have empathy for the guy because of all the statements he made, but I can empathize with his family who mourn him and understand the critic where they now make a big deal out of it because he was part of a political party, but months before, when a whole family of the other party died, they just shrugged their shoulders and celebrated that. But that is a sad situation in America at the moment. I think no violent death should be celebrated, but that is probably because of view of justice. Well, I think you don't. I feel like empathy is doesn't like I don't expect anybody to um so the point I'm trying to make is that actually by not celebrating him, and also if you're like more or less indifferent to him, um I think that already sort of shows empathy, right? Because he did so much bad. Like that's how I sort of think about it. Like, even though he did so much bad and he hurt so many people and influenced society in such a way, um, still sort of like having respect for his death and the causes it has towards his family and stuff like this, is empathy to me. But I don't know if that's just because I might be autistic, because empathy is hard for me. Like empathy comes for me from a point of logic, more so. And yeah. So that's why I would technically already then say sort of like that's already empathy. Because it's like I don't think empathy means forgetting everything the other person has done, right? Right? Like empathy doesn't need to be naive, I think. Like you can have empathy but still like I don't know if that makes sense, but for example with my dad, like I don't have contact to him anymore. But I do have empathy with my dad because I really understand, like I think I really understand his well, his standpoint, I think, or his history or himself. Um but this doesn't mean that I stay. sort of. Like, I still have no contact with him, and I think that's actually better for both of us. Um, and while I do know that hurts him as well, I also do know that with me being there, he wasn't really happy, and that it's not really because of me, but because of like a heavy pattern he has. And I don't know. So I think these things can sort of like be there at the same time, you know? Like, I think you can have empathy with somebody and at the same time know that like what the person has done and like the consequences you then choose for yourself, or how you act around this, or how you what you then do sort of uh will take both of these into account. And I think that's also sort of part of mentalizing, because it's like, yeah, it's like not only about the other person, but that you do see the other person. So I think it's not the concept that you only see the other person, but that you see everything, sort of. Um, and I also think that's really important. Like, I don't think we should, like, if somebody does something like really, really bad, and then something happens to them, I don't think if the best comeback to the situation would be to basically forget everything they have done and just have like full empathy, like if it were like a regular person um experiencing something bad. Because it doesn't really have to do with the empathy in that moment, right? But with the proper response to that person. Um, and that person is still themselves with what they have done. Does that make sense? Like, do you guys understand what I mean? Like, there's like how you act towards someone doesn't need to, like, I don't think it should be entirely based on empathy. Like, because I think only empathy for them is not representing reality. Does that make sense? I think a discussion of empathy is mood, somewhat mood. What does that mean? I don't know that word. When people are getting fired and getting silenced for not mourning for that individual, there's a thing that's being used as a political tool. Very little room for empathy when there's a side that wants to suffocate you. Yeah. I think a discussion of empathy is really hard. Um, I think it's really. I think this incident specifically, and also the reaction to how the influencer now is sort of like being treated after he like cried because that person died, is sort of like it shows a lot about our society. And I don't mean to like blame anyone directly or like judge anyone for their response. Um, but I think what it does show is that we make judgments. Like, we're not curious, we make judgments. There's no, like Charlie Kirk died. This person was meeting, like, has met him in person before, and then this person talks about this incident and cries because that like starts crying, and basically like mourns the death of this person, and is saying sort of stuff along the lines like, yeah, he was a bad person, of course, but like this, like, nobody deserves this. And then having a reaction like this is like really, I don't know, like there's also like the other reaction from like some right-wing people who then like say stuff like, oh, like he's gonna be like MAGA in a few months, like just wait for it. So there's also not really, so also that judgment then is also not really having empathy for him in that moment. And I do understand why people don't have empathy in that moment, right? Because like there are consequences people live through, especially in America right now, where these individuals specifically have sort of like indirectly, directly hurt them or like influenced their life and made it worse. And so it's like, I get it that this relieves, um, that this feels like karma, sort of. Um, but at the same time, it's like sort of like really sad to see that there's so little curiosity and so little like space to talk about stuff, to actually be honest and genuine and talk about stuff and talk it out and listen to the end, sort of. Um, because I feel like we're very judgmental. And I also feel like that specifically like being judgmental is sort of like not be mentalizing enough. No. Like mentalizing is taking the other perspective into account, the other feelings, everything, whatever, taking your perspective, feelings into account, and then also being aware of that fact that there's like multiple standpoints. And that's why I think like mentalizing is sort of this like curiosity and awareness to actually get to the bottom of this and be aware that there might be like multiple stories going on and all of them can be true at the same time. Whereas being judgmental to me means that you just sort of make up a story for the other person and you don't really like there's no option anymore that this story might not be true, but you're so confident of that story that you already judge them based on that story as if that story were true, even though there's no participation of the other person. Like the other person never agreed that that story is true. And in most cases, it isn't true, but it's led by emotions. But you treat it as if it were true, as if it were the reality, the one and only reality, and then you judge the person based on that. Um, and I feel like that's being done by like so many people right now. And that brings us back to basically the point I tried to make about this, that we need more mentalizing right now, and we don't have it because people fear so much and are angry so much. Like there's so many negative news and all of this, and I think that's why we sort of like really struggle with mentalizing in the past few years, especially. Um, and that's why, yeah, empathy is like getting hard and being judgmental is getting more easy. Mood. Having little or no practical relevance, typically because the subject is too uncertain to allow this. Ah, do you say like mood or mood? Mood? Like not mood, but mood. Do you say it like that? It probably is. It probably is. I would likely put it that way. No daughter or spouse should have to see her father, husband being killed. But I cannot in my own consciousness say that maybe the world is a better place without that person. That not just necessarily dead, but fired or taken out of this. Because I don't think the violent act should be celebrated. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like, I don't know, like to me, that's a reasonable response to this. To at the same time, I don't think empathy needs to mean that you that you basically take on the responsibility to regulate the other person's emotions. Empathy to me only means that you understand them. So I think the moment you understand how this situation feels for them, it's like you're not gonna go around celebrate his death. But you're also not gonna like join right wing or something like this, you know? You still gonna be for like, for example, better gun laws and stuff like that. Probably especially because of that incident. Because like nobody should, yeah. Because you believe that nobody should see this. And I feel like the anyway, like this judgment of how much empathy or how little empathy someone can have is definitely like absolutely pointless, and like there should not like you don't really need to make a judgment. So that's why I don't like I this is not like I do understand that people want to be sort of like that it can make people like fear it that he's actually not like left wing, for example. And now they're like supporting him, and then like at the end he turns out to be just like the other ones, sort of. um but yeah, you should just like talk about it and be curious why, because I bet there's like an explanation for it, and like once you have the whole story you can still like make a judgment whether you support him now or not. But there's just like, I don't know, you don't need to write a story for him. Yeah, exactly. And I think that is, for example, already mentalizing. So I think, for example, what I thought when I heard about this controversy um, is, and I think that's mentalizing, um, is, for example, that I thought whenever I like, also the way I just like talked about it is basically like all of this is basically mentalizing we do right now. It's like, for one, we talked about how um how this like the people who like make these statements about the influencer are maybe like I literally like I suggested basically like stories, like their internal stories. Like maybe they feel threatened that like another one of their supporters, like they supported now, is turning to the other side and is betraying them. So they feel like they're in a corner, they're unsafe, and that's how they sort of like act with this feeling of like unsafeness. Um, and I don't really, I don't judge them for feeling so unsafe. Like I get it. If you're that unsafe, like I get it that it's like really hard to see somebody you like idealized as like your left wing um soldier or whatever cry about a right wing person like that and show so much emotion. Especially if you yourself can't really emphasize with that, right? Um, but I also think that for him, for example, for the influencer himself, he's got, I don't remember his name. I can like try to look it up. His name is Dean. Dean something. Dean Withers. So for him, for example, what I see and why I think like I won't cry over Charlie Kirk, but it doesn't mean that his feelings are not valid. So for example, what I thought to myself was that, well, he has actually seen him in person. Like he has talked to that guy in person and had like I think like multiple events actually where he like argued against him and had these like huge discussions and stuff like this. And I think that's also like really different, right? Like it's different to like know somebody died you don't know. Like for me, for example, like Charlie Kirk is like this person who said that this stuff, but I'm not really involved in anything he does or anything. Like I'm not really involved enough to feel this sense of connection that I would mourn for him. Um versus Dean Withers maybe because he like knew him in person, and even though they were like politically on like very different sides, and I'm sure that Dean is maybe probably, yeah, I don't know what he's thinking, but like I think that even if you're on like politically different sides, and even if you think you're like a person is like bad, for example with my dad, like I know that that's like a stretch, but my dad did like many different things, and like I definitely hate him for some of those things. But I also see how my dad kind of like he's he's good at heart, but he's like really really troubled to the point where he's willingly hurting everyone around him. And not in like a harmful way, but in the most hurtful way sometimes he can possibly think of. And so some of these things I absolutely hate him for, and I will never forgive him for them. But if he were to die now and I would be made aware of it, I think maybe I would cry. Like I don't know it, but I think it could be. Even though I don't have contact to him anymore, even though I don't really care about him right now, like he could be dead already. I don't know. And I don't cry because of that. But like once I am made aware of it, I think I would cry. And I I don't think that's like unlogical, right? I don't think that's unreasonable. Like even though I hate him for some things to then like cry over a person you knew. Like how also like it sort of also depends on like how sensitive of a person you are, right? For example, there was like a neighbor of my dad's who was like really old and who sometimes gave me like €5 or something. And I didn't have much contact to him. Really, I don't. But when he died and I was on a funeral, I really I couldn't help myself. I was crying so much. And that's not only because of him, right? But that's also because of just being reminded that a life is ending. Being reminded yet that you're mortal and all the people you love are mortal. Being reminded that this is going to happen for you someday. And that this could happen to anyone you know at any given point, basically. Like there's so much more to someone dying than just them dying. Even though I know this sort of like seems bad, but like you know what I mean? Like there's more to being confronted with the fact of death than that person. Like it's bigger than that person. So I think that there's definitely like more explanations to Dan Withers, like Dean Withers, with no idea, like crying over Charlie Kirk, than him not actually being left but being right wing. And I think this frustration maybe that some people have that he didn't cry over Palestinians is a fact which they could have talked about but didn't before, and now it comes out, sort of. The frustration then sort of, I guess, got bigger that he now cried over like somebody they don't really um believe believe in, or like believe that uh, that person should be cried about. But it's like still like that person didn't meet the Palestinians, and it's empathy is like a really, I feel like empathy has really a lot to do with seeing someone as a person, actually. And I think seeing someone on screen, even though you know that's people, is not giving you the same connection as seeing them in person. And I feel like these fears they have, maybe that he's maybe more right wing than left wing, or that he might move over, or that he's like too easy on them, or whatever. Like, these feelings are also valid, right? Like, you don't need to make a judgment. You can still, like, you can have these feelings and then just sort of like ask, like, hey, why did you cry about Charlie Kirk but not about Palestinians? Like, do you, like, you can voice this this fear in a vulnerable way, and probably he's gonna give you an answer to it, and probably that answer is gonna make sense as well. But yeah, there's no space to for curiosity, I think. I think I can somehow bring that argument with my work. There were a lot of patients I knew only 5 years, which in comparison is pretty much nothing to their kids, versus family members, but that will not stop me from grieving a person that I kind of build a relationship with, even if it's work related. Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's it's really funny actually how weird empathy is sometimes. Because you can cry about a person in a movie and you just known them for an hour and they're not even real. And then some other people you hear about their lives on like Instagram maybe, and have followed for like ages or whatever, and here they're dead, then you don't cry. And it's like not, I don't think we should make a judgment about ourselves in that moment. I think we can be curious in that moment to find out why, maybe. Because, yeah, there's definitely something behind that. But it doesn't need to be that you're a bad person or that you actually didn't like them or whatever. It can just be a whole lot of context. But it could be that you didn't like them the entire time and you just never like unfollowed them. And that would be also interesting to know, right? But I think that we need to be curious about these feelings instead of instantly judging them, because feelings can just be started by like so many different things. Like, they can come from so many different things and be influenced by so many different things. So I think we shouldn't treat them as like, oh, this easy, direct, logical explanation, like, oh, you cried for this person, not for that person, you hated them and you didn't hate them. And that's like, we treat them too easily, like they're not complex, like they're not really complicated to understand. And we should be more curious about this. But yeah, but it's sort of like how I think about this controversy. And I think it's such a important approach to whenever you want to inform yourself about something or whenever you are basically making a judgment or whatever, um to take a second to actually think how much sense that makes, like if there's maybe not a different explanation, to just sort of like put in that extra effort to like mentalize instead of making like a definite judgment instantly. And I feel like a lot of times we're so busy with being in our own reality and projecting our reality on everybody else that we don't even see the possibility that it might just be wrong. And I've had situations where, like, honestly, it seemed so obvious to me what would be true. And then just something absolutely out of context came in and changed the whole situation. Because I felt like, oh, that person, when they walked past me, they did like this disgusted face and like such a dick. Like he's probably, I don't know, whatever, like making all of these assumptions and like making a judgment. But maybe he just like in that second like watched past me and saw like a dog shit on a street or something, like, you know, like sometimes it's so out of context that you just can't expect it, and you just won't know. And I think that's so beautiful and at the same time confusing. um but yeah, like so many times it's just not as bad as we think. So let's continue on with the video actually. Everybody ready? So we were just we had that mentalizing has like an overlap with mindfulness. We had this like four picture graphic with that mentalizing is basically being aware of like your own mental state and your own feelings and the feelings and thoughts of the other person. And that empathy, for example, is the feelings, understanding the feelings of the other person. And that this is important for relationships and for self awareness, and that it can be disrupted and sort of like made harder by fear, anger, shame. And that's where we're just going to start into it again.
You're not going to be so curious and interested about what's going on in the other person. You're going to really think about protecting yourself. So you kind of get concerned with your own welfare and shut down mentalizing. Or anger would be another thing. When you're angry, you tend to blame somebody for something rather than trying to understand it. Or shame is another big one. It's very hard to mentalize when you're feeling ashamed. You want to hide and hide from yourself. Interestingly, romantic infatuation is another thing that gets in the way of mentalizing. You may miss red flags, you know, not pay attention to things because you're so infatuated. So the first answer is strong feelings, but the other thing is defensiveness. See, we encourage people to mentalize, but there's a lot often that we don't want to know. We may not want to think about what's going on with us or be aware of some of the needs or feelings or fantasies that we have. And we may not want to know what's going on in the other person's mind if we're, you know, fearful that they're not so keen on us. You know, we'd rather not know. It's a rather scary idea to imagine that we could be aware of what everybody thinks about everything. There's plenty that we don't want to know.
That would be.
Thank you. And welcome to the chat, pandas. Have fun lurking. This is actually also so interesting. And I want to emphasize, I know we're already pausing. I'm sorry. But that this feeling of like not wanting to know is actually so true. Like we have this so often Like, we do this way more than we think. Like, honestly, like, once I was made aware of this, I noticed how I actually act upon this sometimes as well. Like, for example, sometimes I don't look in the faces of other people because I don't want to know. Like, I fear that I did something wrong and I don't want to know. Um, and shame is also like this, like, being ashamed of something, and that's why you don't want to know. And sort of like borderline like gaslighting yourself to like, oh no, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. I don't want to like you don't want to know. Like, you're not going to check for more clues if the other, like, if you actually did something wrong. If you're so like, if there's so much pressure on you to like not do it wrong. Like, for example, if you have like a really bad self-image and you know that your self-image is like crumbling because of everything, and you're gonna be like super judgmental about yourself, and you're gonna like hate yourself if like anything little happens, you probably gonna sort of try to avoid something. And it's not that you're gonna avoid something happening, that's like, you're gonna try that too. But because you just can't avoid nothing happening at all times, you're also going to avoid to know that something happened. And this can actually go to the point of like gaslighting yourself and just trying to like, for example, one of the things you could do to avoid is being on social media the entire time. Like, that's also how we avoid feelings. Like, coping is like good in some situations, but if you cope too much, you're avoiding feelings. And with those feelings, you're sort of also trying to avoid your truth. And that's like a really, really big one. And that's what kind of like what therapy offers. Like, therapy offers a space which feels safe enough to not avoid those big feelings anymore. Because a lot of people actually feel like really overwhelmed by these big feelings and feel like if they like ever like open that door, they're just gonna be flooded away. They're gonna, I don't know, like they fear it so much they don't even know what happens. And there's usually not even like a very specific thought in their mind about what happens. But they're so scared that they can't handle it, and they feel like they know that they can't handle it, like it will never be over, I will absolutely be overwhelmed by those negative feelings, that they just never open that door and avoid reminders of that door. Even like they really try to gaslight themselves into thinking that, oh no, nothing is wrong, everything is okay. And that's how you sort of then turn to a person who's, for example, addicted. Because addiction is basically only coping the entire time. Coping so much, even though it has negative consequences, but you don't know how to else handle it, that you like rather have these negative consequences of the coping mechanism than actually facing why it's the case. So it's basically like this necessity to avoid something because you don't believe you can handle the consequences and the feelings you have in that moment. It definitely is. That is why I personally know I have trouble, for example, finding friends, because my mind always wonders what a person thinks about me before I even spoke to them. And it can't only be that it was one bad interaction, like your example, I walked past them and then made a face expression, which I instantly point on myself. Yeah. And so this is a big one. And understanding this concept is so, so important, I think, to then be able to be aware what you do in that moment and be aware that you're actually only aware of your own world, of what's going on with you, and you don't even know what's going on with the other person. That it's like that you're aware that this concept of knowing you have is only a concept and not actually reality. And I feel like for me at least, and to be fair, my birthday sick, that's why. Um, but to me, this is changing everything. Like once I know, like, oh, this is what I think. And like before I always like assume like, yeah, there's a fact. Like I thought logically and very hard about this. It's a fact. And like the more and more I learn about psychology and mental health, and also especially like the better I'm able to do mentalizing, because the more I'm aware of the fact that my reality is only my reality and not their reality, and that fuck everything can happen to make their reality different from my reality. And that also like the reality for every person makes sense. Like no person does something which doesn't make sense. Like their reality always makes sense. Even if they can't tell you, it it will make sense. Like they will have acted upon logic, some logic. And they might not be able to recall that logic because it's like underhanded, somewhere hidden in them. But like there's some logic to it. Like anxiety, and when anxiety comes, trauma, and when trauma peeks through, has a logic. Like there's like certain trigger topics, and these trigger you specifically. Like there's a logic to it. Like there's a logic to your body being scared. There's a logic to your body being just, yeah, being anxious and all of this. So all of these things make sense to them as they do to you. But they can make sense in like so many different ways than that you can't possibly grasp on your own what's going on. And that's why you just sort of, you need to be like so curious about this and always keep in mind that this is your story only. And actually then sort of do like experiments and specifically checking yourself if that's true. Like if you get to a point where you're too confident of your own reality to be the reality, and you notice it's getting like an issue because you avoid certain things or something because of it, it can actually help to do like a little bit of like exposure therapy, or for example, literally asking strangers what they think about you and stuff like this. Or like having like this really like far acquaintance where you only had like one interaction or something, and but it sort of like went wrong like halfway, and then specifically on that interaction you pick on and you really try to like talk it down to the end. And you ask that person if they are willing to do that with you, like where it went wrong, to just gain new insight. And this is scary, but it works. But it's definitely scary. I did that myself. Scary. But I was pleasantly surprised. Like this is honestly like the concept why why my vacation now to my family was like so much better than before. Because well, my mom didn't like change all of a sudden. No. But I gave her the benefit of the doubt in terms of like, okay, this like to me, what she said seemed like so judgmental. Oh my god. But maybe she actually didn't mean it like that. And then I just sort of said like, hey, this is like sort of what I understand when you say this is like this and this and that. And this is actually not helping me because of this and this and that. And then all of a sudden she answered with like, oh no, well, if it's not, that's not really what I meant. I meant it just for me. But if that's not helping you, just don't do it. And it was such a casual way that I was shocked, because I felt like you're just, huh? You're just telling me that's not the you just telling me you weren't judgmental the entire time, and I could have just like not did it your way. Like, are you, huh? Huh? Like, I lived my life in fear because of nothing. Are you crazy? Like, you're really like that's what you're telling me. Oh my god, fuck you. But uh and also it's like nice to know as well, right? It definitely like there's an emotional reaction to this. Like it's a progress, okay, guys? Because it's gonna be like honestly like really disappointing how much of this is like just on you and not on the others. Yeah. But it's also helpful, right? Because you can change yourself but not the others, so that's the good part, I guess. So then we take on, we go forth.
True. Well, how can families use mentalizing to support other family members who may be struggling with psychiatric disorders?
Well, if we start with the idea of understanding, that to understand another person requires what we call mentalizing, and actually understanding a family member with a psychiatric disorder is no small task. These can be very confusing. I mean, if you think about like self-destructive behavior, think about, well, why would somebody keep doing something that is so obviously self-damaging? It just doesn't make sense on the face of it. So, I mean, this is why we need the professional understanding of these problems really to help us mentalize. So education actually is extremely important in helping us to mentalize about these problems. And ditto for the patient. I mean, he or she really has to be able to understand himself, herself, you know, what these struggles are about. Patients are often extremely confused about why they feel the way they do, why they're so depressed, why they're so fearful. So that requires mentalizing. But this is a two-way street because, you know, we emphasize that family members need to mentalize, understand the patient. But the patient also really needs to understand the impact of their behavior and problems on their family members so that they can relate to each other. It's a mutual process, mentalizing.
Well, one more question.
I think this is also so important. I feel like I was so confused with like why I'm depressed, why I behave that way, and I felt also like so much shame about it. I felt like, well, I'm in a good country. I have like food, I have water, we're like financially stable. Like, why do I feel depressed? Like, this sucks ass. Like, other people have it way worse, and I make such a fuss about this, basically. And it's like being able to like understand yourself is not easy, I think. Um, especially if you've gone through like trauma and stuff like this. Because I still don't know if I'm autistic or not. All right, like disclaimer, because like this these are also symptoms only traumatized people have, but they could also be, well, special or like especially bad maybe, because I'm autistic. So it could come from like different points. Um, but to me, understanding my own emotions was like really, really hard. And this, for example, can be because of autism, because autistic people don't have that good of like a connection to their body. But it can also be of trauma if you, for example, as a child, had to take care of the other people's emotions and had to be aware of the other people's emotions so well because they were the threat, basically. And you're dependent on them, right? That you didn't have any space anymore to be curious about your own emotions, and your own emotions were sort of like didn't matter. Like, that's the moment where, with childhood trauma, you then come to that point of basically being like really unaware of your own emotions, unaware of your own needs, and not only being unaware of it, but like really being confused by it. Because later on, as an adult, you all of a sudden should figure that out. And in therapy, especially, they talk about emotions like that would make sense. And then you're sitting there and you can't relate to anything because you're like, what the fuck are these guys talking about? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, what do you mean, like, feel inside, be zen, like, try to, like, what do you feel? I don't know what I feel. Like, I sit there, I slow down, my feet hurt. I feel that my legs are heavy. I have stomach pain. Like, this is the sort of the concept of emotions I felt. Like, I didn't feel like, oh, I'm sad, I'm exhausted. Well, exhausted is more directly applicable. But these like, oh, I feel disappointed or blah blah blah. No, I felt pain or no pain. Like that was usually never felt no pain. I always felt like some pain, and that was like the emotions I had, and they just didn't make sense for me. Like sometimes I didn't even know why I had these emotions, Because I couldn't get to the bottom of it. And that's also a thing which can be because of trauma or because of autism. But I basically just sometimes you're so cut off from yourself and from such an early age that you really need to build this understanding. And that's when mentalizing can also like help as a general concept, because you might have been able to sort of mentalize towards others, but not towards yourself, and have had like very different standards for others as for yourself, because you never saw yourself as like a normal person, because you were just surviving. You were just the vessel which needed to survive, sort of. And there's never been some sort of like grace or option even to have grace towards yourself. But yeah. So that's sort of what I found out, that like this being like actually taking the time, and this was work. Like, don't get me wrong, this was work. Like, I don't want to make it seem like it's easy or something, but like this, to me, this was like actual work. Like, I had to actively take the time in that moment to think like, okay, I don't know, like I'm crying now, like why am I crying? Like what is specifically going on? Like what could be going on? And at the beginning it was more of like a logical type of way of like, okay, like what could be happening? What are the options? And then like sort of like which option feels most, usually just most. Usually you feel most towards the option which is right. um But that's sort of like how it started. And there's still situations where I really don't get why, but it doesn't help to just, I don't know, like suppress them or like try to get them over with, or be like, well, um, I don't know why I'm sad. There's no reason, like I shouldn't be sad. So, anyways, but really to just be curious about them. And to me, the first section of this was a little bit too much, let's say. Like, I was like, oh, like, I'm sad, so something bad must have happened. And that's also not entirely true. Like, hormones can be off, and hormones do have a big influence. And not only hormones, but also just like physical exhaustion. Like, not having slept well can change a lot. Like, for not having eaten well can change a lot. Being like a little bit sick can change a lot, like about your feelings. Like, just how much energy you have can have a great difference in how much something is impacting you. So, I personally, I just like, based on my reaction, I sort of like tried to guess, or I sort of evaluated how much this, like how big of a deal this was, like how bad this was. And I only like directly linked it to the thing which happened, and not also keeping in mind that maybe just today is like really bad because I'm tired. And I think there's also people who put it too much on exterior situations, who are like, oh well, I'm just tired like all the time and that's why you piss me off. And just absolutely avoid with that the other person is like up constantly like sort of like pushing them and like, I don't know, maybe gaslighting them or whatever. And they really try to avoid that by just putting it on like exterior things the entire time. So you can't just blame it on exterior things, but sometimes I just noted it's also like I've gone from like only blaming it on exterior things and like, oh, I'm just tired, I'm just this, I'm just that, whatever. I just need to move out, I just need to get a better job, blah blah blah, yada yada, to only blaming it on the direct consequence basically, and being like, oh, you offended me, so like, and I had this reaction, so you're that bad of a person and you pushed me like that bad, to now basically taking everything into consideration, being like, okay, like, this is a situation where I am pissed on, and you did have to say sorry for that. But like, on the other hand, I'm also really tired today, and usually this is not pissing me off that much. So I'm on edge because of something. And that needs to be figured out too. So, yeah. That's sort of how that went. How that progress was. But let's go on to the last chapter.
Question, and that would be, what do you think is the most important thing to keep in mind or to know about mentalizing?
I have a couple of thoughts about it. One is we're often asked by patients, okay, they're at Menninger and we're interested in mentalizing, and we have groups where we talk about mentalizing. So they say, okay, well, now I'm trying to mentalize. You got me doing it. How do I get my spouse to do it? Very important question. Well, our answer is mentalize. Now, let me tell you what that's about. We know that the way to encourage somebody else to mentalize is to be mentalizing yourself. We know it from developmental research. Children learn to mentalize by being mentalized. So when someone takes an interest, empathic, mindful, curious interest in what's going on with you, that helps you mentalize. So if you're in the middle of an argument, very difficult to mentalize in that state. But if somebody can get into what we call the mentalizing stance, hey, what's going on with us? How did we wind up here? Or, you know, when I said this, what were you thinking? It kind of shifts the conversation into a more reflective conversation where it's possible to sort out what's happening. So you're promoting mentalizing. So I would say the most important thing is this idea of a mentalizing stance where you're in a relationship, you're curious, open-minded, non-judgmental, just interested in what's going on inside you and the other person. If we could all do that more consistently, this would be an easier world to live in. But again, the reason we're so occupied with this is that psychiatric disorders, depression, anxiety, substance abuse get in the way of it. And then we need to really pay more attention to it and even have a word for it.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful discussion, and we appreciate it very much, Dr.
Okay. So now we know what to do. We just all need to mentalize our way out of this crisis. I sort of like and hate how soft both of them speak. It's a weird feeling. But yeah, that's probably also, I guess, what then, like the situation with my mom I explained before is like a perfect example of this last spot, that like mentalizing comes with mentalizing. And I personally definitely also know the other way around, right? Like when you don't mentalize, you really put the other person in a spot where they don't mentalize themselves. Like if you approach them like really sort of like judgmental, or with already sort of like this feeling of knowing, or this attitude of knowing, then the other person is gonna like hold back and have like a more uh, yeah, be probably less vulnerable and be more within themselves as well. So But I think it's a really interesting topic, though.